With Week 7 games right around the corner, we need to take a look at our quick and dirty top 36 running backs for Week 7 fantasy football. Now, just like I always do in my rankings videos, let's start off with a few of my bigger hits and misses from just last week. Now, when it comes to the hits, we had a couple: David Montgomery, Breece Hall, Chase Brown. I had D-Mont crazy high last week, and he just continues to be reliable here in fantasy football. How about Breece Hall? Told people to stick with Breece another week. The bounce back was coming. Don't jump ship. Don't trade him away too early. And we saw exactly why last week. And then Chase Brown. I have been beating the Chase Brown drum all season long, and once again it continues to pay off. But I had some big misses as well. James Conner did not perform up to expectations. Now, he did leave that game early with an ankle injury. I think there's not a whole lot of information on it. That's something we need to pay close attention to this week. How about Ray Davis? Now, at the time of the rankings video, we didn't know if we were going to have James Cook or not, but regardless, I still wouldn't have had Ray Davis ranked that high. He looked great against a tough Jets defense. And then lastly, Josh Jacobs. He was ranked too high. He continues to get the volume. He just can't get in the end zone. This passing game in Green Bay is just so good. They don't really overly need Josh Jacobs each week. But we live and learn and we move on. Now we're going into Week 7. So let's go ahead and bring up the Tier 1 running backs for this week. And here you'll see in Tier 1, we got Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Kyren Williams, Bijan Robinson, Alvin Kamara, and Joe Mixon. For Derrick Henry, the king is back on top in a matchup this week going up against Tampa Bay. He's the number 1 overall running back in fantasy football. He's had at least 96 total yards in 5 straight games, 9 touchdowns in 6 games, and is averaging a career high in yards per attempt and yards per touch. Now a matchup going up against Tampa Bay, who allows over 20 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. I got King Henry at number 1. Number 2, it's Saquon Barkley in a matchup going up against his former team, the New York Giants. And it's the revenge game that he has been waiting for. It's going to be in New York too, which is very interesting. Now, as of right now, Saquon Barkley is the RB3 overall in fantasy football. Now, last week was not great for Saquon Barkley. It was his first game under 12.5 fantasy points all year long, and he did lose an offensive lineman in Jordan Mailata. It sounds like he could miss some time with a hamstring injury, which definitely does not help this overall offense. But this matchup going up against the Giants, they allow over 17 fantasy points per game. In the revenge game, I got Saquon at number 2. Number 3, it's Kyren Williams going up against the Las Vegas Raiders, coming off the bye and coming off 3 straight games with 100 plus total yards. A touchdown in every game, 7 touchdowns through 5 games, 21 plus touches in all but 1 game this season. And now a matchup going up against Las Vegas, who allows 23.6 fantasy points per game, 9th most in the NFL. I got Kyren at number 3. Number 4, it's Bijan Robinson going up against Seattle. He is coming off his best game of the season. He's the current running back 8 overall in fantasy football. Now, I would love to see him get more usage in the passing game, but I am not sold that he is 100% healthy still. And because of that, Tyler Algier is more than likely going to be involved once again this week. But in a matchup going up against Seattle, they allow over 22 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, so Bijan's at number 4. Number 5, it's Alvin Kamara going up against Denver, the current running back 2 overall in fantasy football. And owners are a little bit worried because over the last 2 weeks, he's gained under 67 total yards in each game, but he's still had at least 14 fantasy points in 5 of 6 games this season. He's averaging 8 targets per game over the last 3 games. Olave and Shaheed are both hurt and not playing this week. Taysom Hill is already doubtful in a matchup going up against Denver, who allows 20 fantasy points per game. I got Kamara at number 5. Which only leaves us Joe Mixon to round out Tier 1 in a matchup going up against Green Bay. He has played 2 full games this season. He's had at least 25 fantasy points in both of them, a touchdown in each game, 130 plus total yards in each game, and is averaging a career high 5.5 yards per attempt. Now a matchup going up against Green Bay, they allow 19 fantasy points per contest to opposing running backs, so Joe Mixon finds himself right here at the bottom of Tier 1. But real quick, before we dive into Tier 2, I gotta shout out today's sponsor, SeatGeek, and we are pumped to be working with SeatGeek because we buy a lot of tickets. Each and every year, my son and I travel to a different stadium, to a different game, every week 18. It's the end of the season for me, so we can go travel somewhere together. And honestly, what game should we go to this week? Leave those comments down below in the comment section. We've already been to Atlanta, Miami, Tampa Bay, Washington, Cincinnati, Carolina, and Arizona. But just like everything else, it is getting super expensive right now. You gotta try to find a good deal. And that is exactly where SeatGeek comes in. With over 28 million downloads, SeatGeek is the #1 rated ticketing app. There are more than 70,000 events on SeatGeek right now, including concerts, sports, festivals, and more. They put all the tickets from across the web in one place to make sure that you are getting a good deal. Each ticket is actually going to be rated on a scale of 1 to 10, so look for the green dots. Green means good, red means bad. But you know I'm going to hook you guys up right now. If you use our promo code Headliners over on SeatGeek, it's going to get you $20 off. That is $20 off your first purchase with promo code Headliners, so make sure you click the link in the description or the pinned comment to download the app. If there's an event anywhere near you that you want to go to in the near future, be sure to take advantage of this $20. But all right, let's go ahead and dive into tier 2 of the running back position now. And in tier 2, we're going to find Tony Pollard, Kenneth Walker, Breece Hall, Kareem Hunt, Chuba Hubbard, Jahmyr Gibbs, Josh Jacobs, and David Montgomery. Now for Tony Pollard, he's got a matchup going up against Buffalo. He's really not getting enough credit this year either. He's had 12 plus fantasy points in 4 of the 5 games he's played, touchdowns in 3 of the 5 games, 20 plus touches now in 3 of his last 4 games played. We know that Tajay Spears is currently dealing with a hamstring injury, and now a matchup going up against Buffalo. They allow the second most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, so Tony Pollard's all the way up at number 7. Number 8, it's Kenneth Walker going up against Atlanta. So let me get this straight. He went off against Detroit 3 weeks ago, then over his last 2 games, he has a combined total 51 rushing yards. Now, luckily, a touchdown and some passing work really helped him out last week. He's got 16 targets, 15 receptions just over his last 2 games. But now a matchup going up against Atlanta, he's going to need to do that again because they allow the 6th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. After him, we go Breece Hall in a tough matchup going up against Pittsburgh. He finally had his breakout game in 2024, a season high in touches and yards. Still no touchdowns in 3 straight games though, and now a matchup going up against Pittsburgh. They allow the 8th fewest fantasy points per game. Hopefully Devontae Adams can open up this running game even more. After him, we got Kareem Hunt going up against San Francisco, and he looked great in his game prior to the bye week. Really looked like vintage Kareem Hunt. 28 touches for 117 total yards and a touchdown, all while playing 63% of the snaps. Now they're coming off the bye week with an extra week worth of prep for this game in a matchup going up against San Francisco, who allows 19 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. I got Kareem Hunt at number 10. Number 11, it's Chuba Hubbard going against Washington. He's the current running back 7 overall in fantasy football, averaging 14 fantasy points per game, 12 plus fantasy points in 4 straight, and he's averaging career highs in almost every single rushing metric. Now a matchup going up against Washington, they allow 21 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. Really, my biggest concern here is that Washington gets an early lead and Chuba Hubbard kind of gets game scripted out. Now, after Chuba, we got Jahmyr Gibbs going up against Minnesota. His ceiling has been a little bit low, but he hasn't been bad. He still had at least 10 fantasy points in every single game this season. He's the current running back 13 overall, but really the passing work hasn't been there. Only 3 receptions for 48 total yards over the last 3 games. Now a matchup going up against Minnesota. They are tough to run on. They allow the 2nd fewest fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. Jahmyr Gibbs gonna have to get some checkdowns this week. After him is Josh Jacobs going up against Houston. So Jacobs really isn't producing like a lot of people anticipated. The passing game in Green Bay is just so good, they lean on it each and every week. But Jacobs is still quote-unquote safe. He's had 10 plus fantasy points in 4 of the 6 games this season and does have 20 plus touches now in back-to-back ball games. Really, the biggest problem here is the lack of touchdowns. Whether they're being stolen by other players or called back due to penalties, he's had some super bad luck. At some point, that luck is going to change and he's going to find the end zone. This matchup this week, not going to be easy going against Houston. They allow the 7th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. I got Jacobs at 13, followed by David Montgomery going up against the Minnesota Vikings. This dude, since joining the Lions, has had at least 1 touchdown in 18 of 22 games played. He's the current running back 6, averaging 17 fantasy points per game, but here's what's crazy. He's actually played in under 50% of the snaps in all but 1 game this season. He's super efficient. This matchup isn't great, but this dude cannot be denied weekly. Which then takes us down to tier 3. It's Brian Robinson Jr., J.K. Dobbins, James Cook, Devon Achane, Chase Brown, Tank Bigsby, and Najee Harris. Now for B-Rob, he's going up against Carolina. He's currently questionable, but he is back at practice, so that's a good sign. He's had at least 10 fantasy points in every game he's played this season. And if we could have him healthy for this game against Carolina, it would be great. There is no team in the NFL that gives up more points to opposing running backs than the Carolina Panthers at 31.9 fantasy points per game. Just look at what Atlanta and Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier did against them last week. If it comes out by week's end that B-Rob is a full go, he may be up inside my top 12. Then we go down to J.K. Dobbins going up against Arizona. Now we know Gus Edwards is on IR, and J.K. Dobbins is coming off a game with 27 touches. It was his third game this season with at least 100 total yards. Now he gets a matchup going up against Arizona, who allows 23 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. We're going to ride the train in a good matchup while he's healthy. J.K. Dobbins at 16. 17 is James Cook going up against Tennessee. Also currently questionable right now. Now the Bills are optimistic that he could play this week, but despite missing a game already, he is still the running back 11 in fantasy football, averaging 15 fantasy points per game. Now we do need to acknowledge Ray Davis, because this dude earned himself some touches after his week 6 performance. James Cook is still electric. He's still a must-start guy when healthy, but in a matchup going up against Tennessee, who allows only 17 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, if this backfield is going to be split, we need to temper expectations slightly for James Cook. After him is Devon Achane going up against the Indianapolis Colts, yet another running back who is currently questionable to play this weekend. Now, despite having the bye week, as of Wednesday, he still has not completely cleared the concussion protocol. Plus, we know this offense is an absolute mess anyway. Achane hasn't had over 30 yards in either of his last 2 games. It's a great matchup, though, going up against Indianapolis. They allow the 12th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. After Achane, we got Chase Brown going against Cleveland. And really, he didn't get a chance in this offense until about 3 weeks ago. Over the last 3 weeks, he's the overall running back 4 in fantasy football, averaging almost 17 fantasy points per game, and has 4 touchdowns over that span. Now, for the year, he's averaging 5.5 yards per carry, and Zach Moss is just watching his job vanish in a matchup going up against Cleveland, who allows 18 fantasy points per game. I got Chase Brown at number 19. Number 20, it's Tank Bigsby. And he's got the game in London this week with Etienne doubtful to play. Now, Etienne did practice in a limited basis on Wednesday, which is a little bit weird, but he still is doubtful to play. Now, I haven't been one who's been too excited for Tank Bigsby the last couple of seasons. The guy has had 2 big runs this year. Can we be completely honest? He has 297 rushing yards on the year. 123 of them came on just 2 carries. Now a matchup going up against New England, though, it's not bad. They allow the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, and if we don't have Travis Etienne, we could have a lot more Tank Bigsby. After him, we got Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers going up against the Jets. How does this offense change now that they're moving to Russell Wilson? You have to think it's going to be a little bit more pass heavy, and if that's the case, that could open up the running game a little bit more for Najee Harris. He just had his best game of the year, 16 plus touches in every single game this season, and he's averaging 10 fantasy points per game. We just saw Ray Davis run all over the New York Jets. They allow 17 fantasy points per game, and Najee Harris could do the same thing. Which will then take us on to Tier 4, where we have James Conner, Bucky Irving, Raheem Mostert, Nick Chubb, Tyler Algier, Austin Eckler, and Alexander Mattison. For James Conner, does he have an ankle injury? He got it taped up, he came back into the game, then fumbled and never returned to the game. But as of right now, he's not really listed on any injury report. It's a tough matchup for him this week, though, going up against the Los Angeles Chargers. They allow the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, and if he's limited, splitting touches, that's not going to be a good thing for week 7. After him, we got Bucky Irving, who's going up against Baltimore. Now, Bucky finally got a chance with no Rachaad White last week, and damn Sean Tucker stole his thunder. He still had his first game with 100 total yards. He now has touchdowns in 2 of his last 3 ball games, but now he's going to be in a timeshare regardless in this backfield. Whether it's going to be 2 guys with Bucky Irving and Sean Tucker, or 3 guys if we add Rachaad White back into the mix. Either way, though, this is a super tough matchup against Baltimore. They allow the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, and they are way easier to throw on than run on. After him, though, we got Raheem Mostert going up against Indianapolis, and really similar to what we said with Devon Achane earlier. This offense is just crap right now, and pretty much will be until Tua comes back at some point this season. Now, Raheem Mostert still did have 10 fantasy points in his game prior to the bye week, and this is a good matchup going up against Indianapolis. I can definitely see Miami running a little bit more this week to take some of the pressure off the passing game that's already non-existent. After Mostert, we got Nick Chubb, and he's going up against Cincinnati, and I can't believe it's finally happening. He's coming back. but to what extent? That is the biggest question. This offense is not good in Cleveland. Amari Cooper is now gone. Jerome Ford is hurt. Cincinnati, they allow 21 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, but you have to think they're going to bring Nick Chubb along slowly. I would be absolutely shocked in his first game back after a major knee injury if this dude is anywhere over 15 touches this week. But it is a great sign that he is coming back. After him, we got Tyler Algier going up against Seattle, and we all know that Tyler Algier is a good running back. He just needs touches like every other running back. But with Bijan not being 100% healthy, we saw Algier get some touches last week, and then he ended up with 108 total yards and a touchdown. Atlanta really needs a late lead, though, for more Tyler Algier volume. With the late leads, they can kind of rest Bijan a little bit and rely a little bit more heavily on Tyler Algier in garbage time. The matchup this week going up against Seattle, they allow the 11th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, so the upside is there once again. After him, it's Austin Eckler going up against Carolina, and we really need to see what the actual availability of Brian Robinson is going to be, because this is a great matchup going up against Carolina. Now, Eckler, he's had at least 10 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games played, so honestly, given the matchup, he's a flex play regardless this week. Which means we'll then round it out with Alexander Mattison of the Las Vegas Raiders going up against the Los Angeles Rams, and they haven't had Devontae Adams in this offense for a few weeks, so not a whole lot is really going to change now that he's gone. Mattison is going to be right around 15 touches. He's going to get you right around 60 yards or so with the occasional touchdown. In a matchup going up against the Rams, though, they allow the 6th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, but overall, this offense is nothing to get excited about, so really he's just a little bit more boom or bust as a flex option this week. Which means all we have left is tier 5, which is Ty Chandler, Tyrone Tracy, Jordan Mason, Jonathan Taylor, Isaac Guerrero, Javonte Williams, Ramondre Stevenson, and Ray Davis. Now for Ty Chandler, he's going up against Detroit, and the fact that the Vikings traded for Cam Akers says a lot about the health of Aaron Jones, who could miss some extended time. Now no, I am not worried about Cam Akers. He's had like 3 good games in the last 4 years. Ty Chandler is still the best option in this backfield, but this is a super tough matchup going up against Detroit. Then we got Tyrone Tracy going against Philadelphia. Now, Devin Singletary is still questionable, but why would they continue to rush him back? Tracy is playing great. Back-to-back games with 100-plus total yards. He's averaging 21 touches a game over his last 2 games. He's earned a role in this offense regardless, but we do know that Philadelphia is a lot easier to throw on than run on. After him, we got Jordan Mason going up against Kansas City, currently questionable to play. For sure can't really see him getting the volume that we're used to. You have to think that Isaac Guerrero is going to have somewhat of a larger role, but this is a super tough matchup for them as well. No team in the NFL allows fewer fantasy points to opposing running backs than the Kansas City Chiefs. Then we got Jonathan Taylor going up against Miami, also questionable to play. Could this be the return of Anthony Richardson as well? Now, this is a great matchup. Miami allows the 3rd most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, and obviously if JT is healthy, we're throwing him in our fantasy lineups. If that's the case, if he's a full go by the weekend, he's going to find himself right there on the verge of a low-end tier 1, high-end tier 2 running back. Now, after JT is where we have Isaac Guerrero of the San Francisco 49ers going up against Kansas City. He's in line for more touches with this Mason injury, but like we mentioned, this matchup is just not a good one. And honestly, Isaac Guerrero didn't look that great last week, with the exception of a long 76-yard run. Before that, he had 9 carries for 23 yards, an average of 2.5 yards per carry. Now, we know this offense can put up points on anyone, but he is going to need some goal line carries to really give us a better fantasy day this week. Then we got Javonte Williams going up against New Orleans. This overall offense in Denver is getting better, but Williams hasn't really been anything close to consistent. Now, New Orleans last week got embarrassed by Bucky Irving and Sean Tucker, but when it comes to Javonte Williams, he's really a flex at best. Which will bring us down to Ramondre Stevenson going up against Jacksonville, another guy questionable to play. Now, we would love to have him in this matchup going up against Jacksonville because this defense is that bad. If he ends up 100% healthy, he's going to jump up in that 19 to 20 range, so pay attention to his availability throughout the week. And then we have Ray Davis going up against Tennessee. This dude just looks so good, and then Buffalo didn't really use him much in the second half of that ball game in week 6, but he has earned touches, and we still do not know whether or not James Cook is going to be 100% healthy or not. If James Cook is limited, we could see Ray Davis jump up inside the top 24 here in week 7. which will get us through our quick and dirty top 36 running backs here for week 7 fantasy football. Now, just like I say every single week, there's probably a few guys we don't agree on. That's okay. Let's have those conversations down below in the comment section and try to come up with the best possible rankings that we can. You gotta remember, we're in this together. We do this because we want to see you succeed at this game. Now, if you enjoyed today's video, do me a favor and hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. We greatly appreciate the support all season long, and we're continuing a push to the fantasy playoffs. But I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here today. Hopefully you enjoy the rest of your day, and then most importantly, do your part to make the world a better place.
Analytics.